All right, folks, let's get started. So today is Memorial Day, and in the honor of Memorial Day, we are going to be discussing the concept of honor. Before we get into the main part, I want to tell you about this entire series. This is a series called 103 Great Ideas. Actually, I started my meetup in New York City about 4 years ago on these ideas. Let me tell you about this project. This is a project done by Encyclopedia Britannica and University of Chicago about 70 years ago. This was spearheaded by a gentleman called Mortimer Adler, but he had probably 100 thinkers in various areas working with him on this. So this project is called Great Books of the Western World. What they found was that people were too focused on what ideas were current, and they were getting all bogged down into just the latest fad or latest ideas or thoughts that were around. And the entire context of the Western thought was missing from everyday conversation. So they were very interested in bringing all of that and making that accessible to people. So what they did was that they collected all the thinkers, all philosophers, psychologists, economists, scientists, novelists, basically all thinkers, from Homer to Freud. They stopped at the turn of the 19th century because it is very difficult to evaluate somebody's thought, if it is current, if it is too close to you, don't have enough perspective, not enough time has passed. So they stopped at that time. And what they did was they prepared this giant set of books, which is called the Great Books. I think it's around 50 volumes. But in addition to that, they did something which was truly remarkable. What they did was that they asked a very simple question. What do these people talk about? And they came up initially with a list of 4,000 concepts around which this conversation, they called it actually a great conversation. They thought of it as a great conversation because it is. All great thinkers take in everything that has happened before them, and then they put their own thought. So in that sense, they are conversing with all great thinkers. So they called it the great conversation. So they said, what is the content of great conversation? What are the ideas around which it revolves? And they narrowed it down first to 4,000 and then to 103. So that's why my meetup I started by calling it 103 Great Ideas. Now, what I did was that I actually studied these 103 Great Ideas. I did this with a friend, and we would read one idea per week, and then we would discuss it in great amount of detail and debate about everything about the idea. And it took us 3 years to do it because we went about it very thoroughly. Because what happens is that as you start seeing idea after idea, you start seeing patterns of ideas, how different ideas are related to each other, how ideas are born, they grow, they transform, they decay, and they die. So that you can see like this life cycle of ideas, you can see the network of ideas, you can see you can say, okay, this particular thinker is going to approach this idea this way. So you get a sense of each thinker from this multi-pronged approach. So it's a way of seeing the entire conversation. And it is very profound because what it does is that, what happens is that we are creatures of habit. We focus on whatever it is that is current. Our ideas become habitual. We don't really question many of our assumptions. This is a way of rethinking all your ideas, putting yourself against every idea of yours, against every idea of everybody that has gone on. And it's a completely transformative experience if you're open to it. So that's what the project is, this 103 Great Ideas. And just to tell you the story, I'm going to, this is a very difficult thing to talk about. So I want you to get the whole context of what you can get, and so that you get motivated enough to be doing this, because this is a experiment for me. I want to see if it's possible to have a fantastic conversation based on great conversation of these ideas. And this is a pilot to see what we can do. So I want to give you a larger context first before we focus on this idea of honor. So when you look at these ideas, right? So I studied it for about three years, with this friend, and it was just amazing. It was completely changed my way of thinking, my way of approaching ideas. I was able to see in any culture, say, oh, that comes from there and there, because people kind of think, if you don't understand history of ideas, then you think that every idea you think of is new. But no. There is actually a lot of history behind many of the ideas that you're thinking of. And if you are familiar with it, you already have like a genetic map of all ideas and how they combine together and what you're talking about and what is actually genuinely new. Now, I'm a very big fan of new ideas. I think human beings produce new ideas, and it should produce new ideas, but your ability to produce new ideas is dependent on how well you've taken in everything in the past. So just like if you're, in technology, and if you're trying to figure something out, you need to know everything about technology that has gone on before you in your area in order to take the next leap forward. So similarly, the same is true for ideas. So what I did was that, but I'm used to for a long time, I was used to studying ideas on my own or with few trusted friends. And the great thing about New York is I was traveling in the subway, and I ran into this guy whose meetup I had attended. And I was telling him about this Great Ideas project that I was working on. And he says, oh, you should do a meetup on that. So I said, how can I get kind of thoughtful people who will take in the effort to actually think and talk at this level? It's impossible. He says, no, try it. So I said, okay. So I started, and first I got 9 people. And Francoise, who is here, was one of the 9 people who were there, who showed up 4 years ago. And she's, so I'm delighted that she's here again for the start of this new 2.0 version of it. And then the next meetup, I got about 15 people, next meetup, 25 people. And soon, on a regular basis, I was getting between 30 to 50 people coming to discuss great ideas. And what I did was that I went through the chapters. This is the great ideas. I have the kind of original version. It's a 2-volume version, but the link I have put in the chat for great ideas, that is the one that is readily available. You can get it from Amazon, and which is pretty good. It's a 1-volume version of the same thing. You get the same essays. So I would definitely recommend that. So what I did was that, so I would do something very simple. What I would do is that, the other point is that I have a certain approach to this. I'm not a scholastic. I don't think that ideas are to be studied at university. I think these ideas are living ideas, in the sense that these are the ideas that underpin what we do, regardless of whether we know about them or not. And if that is so, then I believe that the way in which these ideas should be talked about should be accessible to anybody. So what I did was that I went through the chapter again, reread the chapters again, and came up with the questions that were raised about the idea throughout history by all the thinkers. And I would pose those questions. I would offer all the kind of large patterns of answers that were provided by various people. And then we would have a discussion on that. So that was the format. We covered almost 50 ideas that way. I would have people vote on ideas that they would like to discuss, and I would pick the top ideas and we would discuss them. So those were extremely successful. We had about 300 regulars out of whom about 50 would show up, and we would do meetups. So that's what I'm trying to do in this format. Now, this is the Zoom format. All of you are not in front of me, so it is difficult. It is harder to pull off in some ways, but it is easier to pull off in some ways because we can get people who are really deeply into this from all over the world and participate in it. So that's what we are trying to do. Okay, so that's the whole thing. Now the question is, how do you approach this? These are ideas of all the great thinkers. So I recommend, so let me offer you like a one metaphor or one image for it. So imagine that these are 75 thinkers here in the great conversation. Okay, these are all scientists, novelists, philosophers, psychologists, economists, historians, everybody. Imagine that we have a Zoom meeting and there are 75 additional names. Now there are no faces to it, they are not speaking, okay, but they are all names over there. So imagine that that's the gallery that we are talking, that the conversation is with, but because that's what the gallery is. Now they have sent me little chats beforehand, and you can see them back here. Okay, these are all the chats that they have sent me in their books that they have written over the years on these topics. The great thing is that these great books has actually categorized these things in some ways, and at the back they give you references so you can go and pick up, follow up on any idea of anybody. So that is the, we are actually having a conversation with all the great thinkers. Now, how do you have a conversation with all the great thinkers in the world? I recommend, for me, the way I approach it, and I strongly recommend this, you have to have a combination of pride and humility to do that. Pride in the sense that, look, you are a human being just like them. You are living your life. And so you are equal to them as a human being in your faculties, so be true to your own life and speak from your own experience. And that's what any of these people would greatly appreciate, whether it is Socrates or Locke or anybody else, or Newton or Shakespeare. They would appreciate that, you speaking from your heart and listening deeply and connecting it to your experience. So you have the pride of being a human being as any other human, as being as they are. The second thing I would say is that you have to have humility in the sense that, as Shakespeare would say, you realize once you see this entire conversation that there are more things in heaven and earth, not Polonius, but Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. What happens is that we, by our nature, get focused on certain narrow ideas. And this is a way of being open to the entire range of ideas that is out there. Okay, so it's kind of combination of speaking from your experience, having the pride and confidence to do so, and at the same time being open to ideas of others, whether it be ideas of all these great thinkers or ideas of the participants over here. So that combination is what would, that's the best way of making the most of this conversation. Now, with that, I'm going to go into the presentation on honor. I want to make it interactive, so I will we'll come to the rules of that. There are 4 rules that we use, so we'll go through that. But I want to give you, I'm going to start by introduction. I've looked at this entire field of honor, and I'm going to talk 3 different themes. We're going to talk about personal honor, a sense of honor that a person has himself or herself, of saying that is their own kind of self-conscious virtue or your own commitment to your own moral excellence. So that's the first topic. The second topic is honor when it comes to close interaction with others. And this would be honor between friends and families, people that you know, that you work with, that you interact closely with. So that's the second one. And the third topic is going to be honor and fame in society. So that's going to be about, how does honor work in a society? What is the concept of fame? What is the connection between fame and honor? And what we are going to do is that for each of these concepts, we are going to go across history and look at how this concept has changed over time. What was the Greek sense of honor? What was the Christian sense of honor? What happened to it under Machiavelli and Renaissance? How did the Enlightenment change it? What happened in modern times when different philosophies came into being? What is the state right now? So we're going to go over all of this, and we will run into, this is the timeline over here. And in addition to timeline, there are going to be those three prongs: personal sense of honor, honor between friends and family, and honor in society, honor and fame in society. Those are the three things. And to make this discussion manageable, we are going to go one by one. So when we are talking about personal honor, please do not bring up the issue of society or anything like that, because there is enough complexity to deal with over time, over thinkers. So we are going to go systematically in those three steps. All right. Now, let me start by, again, in the honor of Memorial Day, let me start off by describing a scenario. Imagine a young 18-year-old American soldier in the midst of a battle in World War II. Suddenly there is, his platoon is attacked. Nobody knows what is going on. All their lives are in danger. That soldier's own sense of honor, of doing the right thing, is what his life is dependent on. His band of brothers that are around him, are counting on his sense of honor. Not only counting, they have full confidence that each of them is an honorable person. And that is what is needed for each of them to operate. All of them know that they're pursuing an honorable pursuit, that what they are doing, their entire country is behind them, that what they are doing is considered honorable by everybody, and they feel that what they are doing is honorable. So there is a social sense of honor. All of these are alive in the mind of the soldier at that time. And he will not be able to function without these. These ideas are living ideas. These are not words. These are the things that make life possible. The kind of life that is there. Now, you may say this is an extreme situation, but it is only compressed. The value issue is compressed in time and in space. The situation is not that different when you are making a business deal with somebody. Whether you can count on your friend on when you need them, whether how the society views you and you view the society, whether you think doing something is worthwhile. All of these issues permeate through everything that we do. So this is not an academic issue. This is not a matter of definition. This is crucial to lives of people. That's what these are. Let me give you another example from the founding fathers. When you read the Declaration of Independence, most people know the beginning. Most people don't remember the end. the end goes like this. For the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Look, if each of these gentlemen did not have this sense of honor, we would not have America. If each of these people did not have the confidence that all these other gentlemen were men of honor, we would not have America. And if each of these gentlemen did not think that what they were doing was considered honorable by their own people, they knew that they would not have the support to be able to do this, so we would not have America. So again, this is not an academic issue. This is a core issue. So that's what we are studying. Okay, so that's a very brief introduction to why we are studying it and why such ideas are important. Okay. All right. So with that, we're going to go into the three parts. First is a sense of personal honor, then friends and honor between friends and family, and then honor and fame in society. Okay. And what I want to do is I want this to be interactive. So I will do a very short presentation on personal honor, and then we will open it up for questions only on personal honor. Then we will do a presentation on friends and family. Then we will talk about that, and then we will do the social, and then we'll talk about that, and then we'll do the breakout groups. Okay, so that's the format. All right, so let me start with personal honor. I want to show you the complexity of thought here in this book. Again, I have put the link over there. So I'm going to read out the first paragraph to you, so you understand just the level of integration that is done for each of the ideas in this 103 ideas. The notion of honor and fame are sometimes used as if their meanings were interchangeable, and sometimes as if each had a distinct connotation. In the tradition of great books, both usages would be found. It is seldom just a matter of words. The authors, who see no difference between a man's honor and his fame, are opposed on fundamental issues of morality to those who think the standards of honor are independent of the causes of fame. This opposition will usually extend to psychological issues concerning human motivation and to political issues concerning power and justice. It entails contrary views of the role of rewards and punishments in life of an individual and of society. See, this is the other thing about this presentation on 103 great ideas, of each of these presentations. Each of these ideas is run through individual, through thinking, through emotions, through interpersonal interaction, to society. And there are implications, there are consequences in all levels. So it's like a network. Each idea and each position on each of the ideas permeates through all these levels. And that's what we trace in this presentation. So let me talk now about the sense of personal honor. This is a quote from Montaigne. So I'm going to have one paragraph by Montaigne, a little bit by Aristotle to get us started. So Montaigne writes, "It is not for outward show that the soul is to play its part, but for ourselves within, where no eye can pierce but our own. There she defends us from the fear of death, of pain, of shame itself. There she arms us against the loss of our children, friends, and fortune. And when opportunity presents itself, she leads us on to the hazards of war, not for any profit, but for the honor of honesty itself. The way Mortimer Adler and these authors summarize it is that the sense of honor presupposes self-consciousness of virtue in an individual. So it is about not just moral excellence, not about virtue, but self-consciousness of virtues, of your commitment to being virtuous. It binds him in conscience to live up to the image of his own character, insofar as it has lineaments which seem admirable to him. So it is about living up to one's own moral ideal. Now, this is a core idea of Aristotle and of Greeks. That's where we see it in the most prominent way. Honor is the object of two different virtues in Aristotle. One is ambition and one is pride. So pride, Aristotle regarded that as a crown of virtues. It is kind of being proud of being proud, or being self-conscious, self-aware of being virtuous, your relentless commitment of being virtuous. That's what Aristotle is getting at. Now, let me briefly talk about how this concept of honor, personal honor, has changed over time. So for Greeks, they had a very clear conception of virtue. So there were the virtues of courage, justice, prudence, temperance, and pride. The virtue of honor or pride was your commitment to doing all of these. Now, what happens with the Christians is that, on the face of it, people are shocked because like pride as a virtue is not part of the Christian thought. But there is still a concept of honor, which is very different. The concept of honor focuses on the glory of God. Whether you are doing something, it's a much more, instead of it being a personal issue, it is about whether you are living up to God. And so on one hand, there is a commitment to living up to God. And on the other hand, there is a concept of humility, which on the face of it seems exactly opposite of pride, but it is not. As far as I can see, because it is all about knowing that you have limitations. So the core concept of honor is replaced by your commitment to pursuing the glory of God. And humility is simply identification of your limitations in doing that. Now, when you move to Renaissance time, and with people like Machiavelli, the focus becomes the issue of power and of social hierarchy. And honor is very closely tied to that way of thinking with power, of how much power you can exert over other people. Now, that's a very dramatic shift of honor to more kind of connected to achieving kind of social position. When you move, I'm just going through it very, very rapidly. When you go, the point of that is to see that the patterns change. How idea changes over time, and what are the causations of the change of ideas. Okay? So first, I want to just show you the pattern. In Enlightenment time, where there is a lot of focus on reasoning and your understanding of the world, the idea is closely tied with honesty and with being able to be true to your own mind. And kind of honor is focused on that. The epistemological part becomes larger. And then in modern times, you have two different movements. One, that of materialism, which holds that man is shaped by material factors which are not within their own control, and there is no sense of agency. So in that sense, that concept of honor pretty much dies with materialism. The second view is that of subjectivism, where you say people just do what they feel like anyway. That's all a human being is, just reacting emotionally through things. So under which also there is no base for a concept of honor, because honor is all about doing the right thing regardless of what the situation or what you may feel at a particular point of time. So again, that concept has changed. So I think there is a tremendous decline in the concept. So another general point I want to point out is the relationships between concepts here. The concept of honor rests on the concept of morality. What is moral? As the concept of morality changes over time, the concept of honor changes dramatically. Greeks have a sense of what is moral, and their concept is based on that. The Christian sense of morality is different, and the sense of honor changes accordingly. In the kind of the social hierarchy phase of Machiavelli, the sense of morality is tied again to power, achieving power, and that again leads to a different concept of honor. In case of materialism and subjectivism, again, there is a tremendous decline in the concept of morality itself, which makes the concept of honor go down as a social focus. Now, while it may change like this, it's still, individuals in all these eras will hold all kinds of contrary position. What we are trying to do is to map out the possible, histories of these concepts and the general patterns within it. And individuals can vary quite a bit within that. So that's a very quick summary of what all of these people have to say about the concept of personal honor. Now, what I want to do is I want to open it up to questions. Now, we have 4 rules for questions. You can, 4 rules that we have used for the past 4 years that work very well. Number 1, when you want to ask a question, raise your hand. Here, you can raise your hand by typing an exclamation mark in the chat, or raising your hand in Zoom, or typing a question. I want this to be interactive, so I want to hear what all of your thoughts are, and try to keep it brief so that we can get to as many issues as possible. Okay, so try to be brief. So the rules are: raise your hand. Second, keep on topics. See, for example, now we are talking only about the personal sense of honor. That's it. Okay. Third is be brief, and 4th is be courteous. Feel free to disagree with anybody, on anything, including myself, of course, but do that courteously, so we can have really rich dialogue with all these 4 rules. So it's going to be Joe first. Joe, go ahead.
Thank you, Shrikant, and that was a wonderful summation of actually a lot of the things that I had taken away from it. Would you say that the concept of honor is inseparable from the virtues of temperance and courage, and that they the ability to command reason on what one ought to do and what they ought not to do, and that is courage, And then the idea of desire is also critical within this concept too, because you're managing your desire, and that's a form of temperance. But I would like to maybe try and ask you about maybe two others and add maybe is the idea of, you'd mentioned self-awareness, but the idea of self-respect is also critical to the idea of honor, in the sense that um, if you dishonor yourself, then if you're willing to, if you don't respect yourself, you'll probably be willing to dishonor others because you don't respect who you are. And then the last one is one of sincerity, where it is an idea of one must be, as you had already alluded to with the founding fathers, dedicated to the idea of what it means to have honor and to not let the other individual down. And that is critical. So those those are the two, the things that I'd like to add. But the only thing I would add to that is, again, the idea of self-respect is actually a critical point, because if one doesn't respect oneself, then they can't worry about what others.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you, Joe. Really appreciate this. So firstly, connection with other virtues. Now, there is, like, for example, Greeks like Aristotle or the Stoics after them, who are completely in the Greek tradition when it comes to the virtues. All of them held that all virtues go together, in the sense that you need to practice all of them in order to practice any of them. The virtue of honor is most closely associated with Aristotle's virtue of magnanimity or pride. And that, he explicitly says that it is kind of the culmination, like it is awareness that you are pursuing all the virtues. It is your commitment, self-aware commitment to pursuing all the virtues. So yes, I mean, you can't really be honorable without courage or without temperance. Those are all kind of parts of it. And this kind of sits on the top of all of them in some sense. On one sense, it sits on the top, one sense it's on the bottom. In the bottom, it's like it's your commitment to your own honor, which is at the foundation of your pursuing whether a courageous act or a temperate act. And in the sense it is at the top, it is kind of self-awareness and self-respect that comes from knowing that you are pursuing all the virtues that you should pursue. I fully agree with you on self-respect. Self-respect is the inexorable consequence and inexorable result that you have when you are honorable. So it is very much connected. It's very much part of it. And on the sincerity part and the fact that others have to depend on that, we will go into details of that. But absolutely, yes. We are social beings, and only if a person is, what shall I say, when you're trying to deal with people over a long period of time, each person knowing that the other person is honorable is absolutely essential for that. So that's one part of it, that it is a requirement of life. The other part of it is kind of aspirational. It's an issue of admiration. It's important for each person to find people that they admire, that they can look up to. And that is a requirement of us as social beings to be as good individuals as possible. So there is the issue of admiration plus the issue of kind of practicality, practical necessity. So now it's going to be Françoise first. Give me just a second. Françoise, CP Rao, and then Jeff. Françoise, go ahead.
I was thinking and continuing on what just was said about self-respect, but it's also the respect of the honorable thing. there's been so many mistakes in history, and by redoing history and seeing those mistakes, you lose respect, you lose the morality change. So that respect of the things which are honorable are the continuation of, the concept of honor. We change with morality, and we change with the respect of what supposedly is honorable and may not stay honorable.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Next one up is CP Rao. Go ahead. CP Rao, just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question. Oh, you can't speak. Okay, give me just a second. Let me read out his question. Okay, he says, I believe personal honor is also driven from the cultures of that country or region, etc. Having said that, during your study of honor, did you see a big difference of personal honors between cultures? If yes, what is it? Okay, very good. I absolutely true. Absolutely true. I mean, just like I have said, just like we just now looked at how the Greek honor is different from Christian honor, from Machiavellian honor to the Enlightenment honor to the materialistic honor and subjectivist honor. This is in time. This the great books focuses on the Western world, and the same issues apply everywhere. So just like there is a variation in time, there is variation in space. So the sense of honor, for example, people in India or people in Japan is going to be very different. Their morality is going to be very different. Their honor is going to, concept of honor is going to be very different. And all these ideas, I mean, not just about honor, but all the ideas are different and similar. So it's like, it's to kind of, and the good thing about these people who put together these great books is that they are explicitly aware that they are focusing on the Western conversation. And they say, look, this is what we know, and this is what we are presenting. And I certainly think that it is worth incorporating the Indian conversation and the Chinese conversation, at least those two, because those are the two kind of large conversations which have influenced, which are with like about the same number of people as the Western world each, and you need to incorporate all of this. And they will not only have a different sense of honor or different sense of morality, they will have a different sense of logic and art and society. All those concepts are different, and those need to be integrated. So absolutely, there is tremendous differences, and I couldn't begin to go into the differences because it would require act. I can do it in a kind of impressionistic way, and I do it in the impressionistic way. You need to do that, but I'm hoping that at some point, we have a lot of conversation going on between. For the first time, we have a real conversation going on between the West and China and West and India, not so much between India and China, but West with each of them. And hopefully, we will come to a point where somebody summarizes the Indian tradition and the Chinese tradition, which by itself it's not just one thing. It is kind of multifaceted. They have, India has as big a history of ideas as the West does. So you have to take all of history of Indian ideas and combine it with that. All right, next up is Jack.
So Shrikant, I would say one of the hot topics that I've often encountered with regard to the discussion of honor is that if you depart from kind of the authority of a god or gods and a motivation to successfully obey that god or those gods based upon however you understand from the right book or whatever it might be, what virtue and what honor, what the rules are, what's a common rationale for an individual to select, define, and act upon their own beliefs about what is quote unquote honorable?
Okay, that's an excellent question. So let's look at the answer to this question across history. Like most of, for example, for Greeks, almost all variations of their morality, their own personal sense, is based on culture, Greek history. So for example, Aristotle pretty much summarizes what was held at that time. Then the Christians, they come up with a new rationale, but not until Martin Luther, you have the situation is that a person, and pretty soon the Christianity gets converted into Catholic Church, and Catholic Church holds that we have a say on what constitutes honor and what constitutes right. Martin Luther's statement, and putting him nailing it on the door there,
He
is
put
a
those
declaration.
95 treatises on the Wittenberg door and said, unless convinced by scripture or evident reason, I shall not recant.
Yes, exactly. So that is, again, rebirth of an individual saying that. Now, what happens is that when you kind of fast forward from there, you find that that view gets into the Enlightenment tradition, where people hold that each person needs to do that, and that is the most right thing to do. So they are kind of, but at the same time, it's not it is based on reason. So it has to be reasonable. So it is not only personal, but it has to be reasonable. And if it is reasonable, people with reason will agree with you on that. Then you come forward to materialism. You say, okay, nobody can do anything anyway. So then it goes down dramatically, that sense that an individual can hold views. But you can see that it is connected with epistemology of what a person can do with their mind. It then is concerned with morality, and then with honor. So that changes over time. Then you go into the subjectivist era, where you say everything is everybody's emotion, but now anybody's emotion can conflict with other people's emotions, and there is no recourse to that. So then there is a complete conflict between that. And you go through all of this. Today we live in a place where all these ideas are floating around. Some of them are dominant, some of them are not dominant. And most of that, for example, if you look at Greek times, it's kind of looks more or less monolithic compared to the fragmenting today. Add to that the fact, the point I was making about different cultures bringing in different senses of honor and of ideas of epistemology and all of that. So it becomes much more defragmented, completely fragmented notion of that. So that's what I would say. Next up is, let me see, it is Leslie. Leslie, go ahead.
Hi, I was thinking about, as you said, that honor and morality, they change over time, and they're different across different cultures, depending on logic and experience. And I struggle with the idea that there's barely anything that's universally true in the world, because I like to think of the universe as having universal truths of what is good or what is fair or what is right. And when one country's bombing another, the country dropping the bomb thinks that they're fighting evil, and the country being bombed thinks they're being bombed by evil. So I struggle with, are there universal truths at all within the human experience?
Sure. Now, on that question, again, so your idea is closest to Plato's idea in history. And there is a very long way, that has been the dominant idea in Western tradition, that there is a universal truth, and that is knowable directly through kind of insight, and you just have an insight that is true. But that's not the only way of thinking of truth. And what happens is that if you think of truth that way, the way you think about truth is going to change the way you're going to think about morality. That's going to change the way you think about how you think about honor. So, for example, the truth that founding fathers thought of is quite different than the Platonic notion of truth. They thought that it is discoverable. It is something that people can come up with by induction, and that people can talk to each other and convince each other about what they are seeing and put together the evidence for that. That's a very different notion of truth. Then there is a subjectivist notion of truth, where you say anything goes. There is no objective truth whatsoever. So there is no basis. So there are all these three different kinds, at least large patterns of notions of truth. One is kind of intrinsic truth, that it is universal truth, like Plato would say, these forms exist in a cave. So it's almost like an object. Then you have the notion of subjective. I say there's no real truth. Everything is everybody's feelings and reactions to things. There is no other base that is possible. So that's the other extreme. And then there is the idea of kind of more kind of rational or scientific, where you say that you have to inductively come up with something, relentlessly test, correct it, and you show your evidence to other people, learn from other people in the process. So these are the three different notions of truth. And how you think about morality and how do you think about honor is going to depend on which of these things you start with. And that's what you can see in history. So it's going to be Mike, and then Keaton, and then David. Mike, go ahead.
Okay. I think you can hear me now.
Yes.
I'm unmuted. Okay. I agree with you and everybody else who said that self-awareness drives this stuff. We have an image of who we are, being possibly the only animal, or at least the animal is most self-aware. And whether you believe that that image of who we are is driven by the soul, superego, conscience, or just a collection of belief engine words, or the Greeks called described the homunculus as a little rodent that sits inside your head and tells you what to do. And we've got, with that, as part of that self-awareness, we have a social contract and a personal image of who we are and how we fit into society, and how we fit into that contract. And it's hard. We try not to change that. I mean, it takes somebody has to basically hit you over the head with a 2x4 to get you to change your personal image.
Absolutely.
Now, I tend to believe in looking for root cause analysis of what caused the problem. The entire Socrates school of philosophy, Plato, Aristotle, and so forth, and followed by Alexander the Great, who was Aristotle's student, even though he's not considered the greatest thinker in the world either. Now, what you see depends on your point of view. So when we
got it. So can you go ahead and just summarize what you want to say, or ask a question?
And I think a lot of it was delivered by the fact that Socrates was a brigade commander in the Peloponnesian War. Had he been killed, civilization might not have happened the way it did. So,
all right,
a lot more to say on that, but I'll yield the balance of my time to all you smarter people.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mike. Okay, next. So I absolutely think that, the self-consciousness is critical. Your self-image is critical, and what you're doing with others is also part. So those are like three different parts of that, and that does vary over time dramatically, depending on all the other ideas that you hold. And in terms of kind of root cause analysis, I mean, the great thing that these great books do is that you will see idea after idea. For example, the point that Leslie was bringing up about epistemology. Once you understand how the epistemology has moved over time, your understanding of all these issues become much, much powerful. And you can see like each movement in each of the concept of why it happened and how it happened, because you can trace it to a way of thinking. So next up is Keaton. Keaton, go ahead.
Yes, my question is kind of simplistic. I'll just read it. It's if honor differs across cultures, as you mentioned, Indian, Chinese, Western, what's the source of honor? Like, for example, from Jungian, is it like inherent in human? Is it innate in human archetypes? And then you start there and then evolve through the cultures. Also, do non-human, like animals, have honor?
Okay, excellent question. Now, Sorry about that. Excellent question. So what I would say is, so I don't know about animals. There is a lot of work on primate research and stuff like that. So we can go there. I actually study a lot of it, but that's kind of, beyond the scope of the discussion over here. So I'm going to keep it aside. I would say that there would see the core point here is that honor is self-consciousness. It's your own consciousness of your own morality. So that's what it is. That's the height. That is the kind of the core of it. Now, the question is, how does it differ? If the honor differs in cultures, what is the source of honor? The source of honor is basically morality that the culture holds. And the morality held by the culture is quite different from each other. Okay, the morality that different cultures hold is different. But whether you are following, so honor is, are you conforming to the morality that you hold? That is going to be the root cause of honor. So even if your morality is different, you will still have honor, which rests on that. Now, what that means is that honor for one culture, like the same action, would be considered honorable for one culture, and that would be considered despicable and dishonorable from the perspective of another culture. So that will vary. So it's like awareness of morality. That's what I would say. Next question is from David. David, go ahead.
Hi, Srikant. Thanks for hosting this. So I wanted take your insight on the work by sociologists Bradley Campbell and Jason Manning about dignity culture versus honor culture. And just summarize it with little paragraphs from Reason magazine. In honor culture, men maintain their honor by responding to insults, slights, and violations of rights by self-help violence. These cultures of honor tend to arise in places where legal authority is weak or non-existent, and where reputation for toughness is an effective deterrent against predation or attack. During the 19th century, most Western societies began a transition towards dignity cultures, in which all citizens are legally endowed with equal rights. Dignity does not depend on a reputation, but exists as an unalienable right that do not depend on what other people think of one's bravery. And having a thick skin and shrugging off slights become virtues because they help maintain social peace. And there's also, and of course, serious conflicts cannot always be resolved privately. In dignity cultures, persons' property rights are defended by last resort through third parties such as courts or police that wield the necessary violence as opposed to individuals. So I was curious how that compares and relates to your discussion of honor.
Sure. So firstly, I would say is that we should never get bogged down in terminology. So for example, both these concepts of honor culture and dignity culture both refer to the concept of honor that as we are talking about now. So that dignity is also a sense of honor for those culture, and the honor culture, that's also a sense of honor. Now, both these ideas, these are very different societies, and they have different notions of what individuals are, what the interaction between individuals are, what are the means you have of interacting, thinking and interacting with individuals. So for example, in what you call the dignity culture, there, people held that each individual is capable of reason. You're able to convince other people. There are objective truths, and that is the grounding on which your life and social life is based. And what really matters is your adherence to that. So you can always fall back upon a third party. So dignity culture is a direct consequence of that view of human beings. Take the other issue of what is called honor culture. dislike calling it honor culture because it's really kind of revenge culture, if I want to call
no,
it.
I mean another form of is honor shame culture. So
let me make it short. What it is that in that honor culture, I don't want to mix up words. That's why I don't want to use it. I would say revenge culture in the sense that what happens is there it is held that there is no common understanding that people have. People don't have rational faculty. Might makes right. And the only way to actually show that you are able to, so it is like very much of a Machiavellian kind of a situation. So you can see that the difference, the point that I was making, that concept of honor rests on the concept of morality, and which rests on the concept of epistemology. And here you can clearly see that one culture has epistemology of rationality, the other culture of just brute emotions. The one culture has the idea of morality, of kind of using reason to pursue life and interacting with people to make life better, versus using force to deal with people as a primary means. And as a result of that, their notion of honor is completely different. Okay, the next one is, Joe, you had a point. And then what we will do is that we will go to the next phase where we'll talk about the interaction between people. Go ahead, Joe.
Which point was that? Was that related to
about Christian? Oh, let's do one thing. Let's just go to the next one. We'll have more opportunity to talk.
I can just comment really quick. Okay.
Sure. No, go ahead.
No, I would just say that to Jeff's question is that the idea of charity being raised to a level of a cardinal virtue was kind of a way of changing what it meant to be honorable, and as a way of also, I think Martin Luther was based on the idea of that the church was selling indulgences. So the idea that it was being manipulated and that it was raised to this level changed the idea of honor in general, and also as a form of control. That was my only point.
Okay, so let me go ahead and let's go to the issue now of honor between people. Okay, so honor between people. I'm going to read this out. Let me see who this is. I don't remember who this is. A society of misanthropes despising each other is as unthinkable as an economy of misers. The social nature of man requires sympathy and fellow feeling, love and friendship, and all these involve some measure of approval based on knowledge or understanding. According to one theory, this is Aristotle's theory, the highest type of friendship springs from mutual admiration, the respect which men have for one another. Okay, so this is the second thing that we're talking about, and that is, in order to have, so we are social beings. This issue of honor or issue of morality or even issue of epistemology is not just an individual issue, but it is a social issue. And in order, given that, the concept of honor has this social component. So we are first studying this social component at a personal level, where you actually know the people, where you have a deep interaction with people, and you can see that what they are doing and how they are doing it is impacting each other's lives. And how does the concept of honor apply there? And I think the best thing that I have on that is, again, Aristotle, where he talks about different kinds of friendship. He says there are friendships of pleasure, there are friendships of utility, and then there are friendships of character. The honor applies to friendships of character. And these are the friendships that are there, which are long lasting, where the level of trust is very high, and that provides a base for an interaction which is far more enriching to all people concerned. This is absolutely critical when it comes to kind of close kind of business ties or kind of working together. You're counting on each other to do things. So that's another range of that. So let me just open it up. I don't want to say too much, because what I want to do is that I want to bring in all the points that we looked at a personal honor in general related to that, but I will take questions. So folks, go ahead. What do you think? So the question is, how does the concept of honor work in individual close relations? I think admiration is a biggest example of it, but there are others. So any thoughts? Anybody would like to chime in and talk about how they think about honor in relationships to other people? Feel free to comment on things as well.
I had a quick comment.
Go ahead.
I think, when you mentioned like between two people, let's say the honor, it involves like trust, the relationships of character. And in some ways, it kind of makes you kind of abandon things like that you would use for survival. For example, if you trust them, the character, there's honor, you might not like be like concerned about, are they going to do anything? It's you kind of be free from that.
Yes.
Free from that survival instinct, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that it provides a strong base for a wide-ranging and deep interaction. Okay. Anybody else? Joe, go ahead.
Mine's just a question. Is the distinguishing characteristics between dignity and character, is dignity is that somebody is entitled to and somebody that is they're born with it, and that character is actually the actions of the individual versus, and it's who they are, it's what they choose to do, whether it be the right thing. Is that a correct distinction to make? Because I know there are a lot of questions about that, and if it is, then that would make more sense to me as far as its relationship with Aristotle's concepts on friendship.
Yeah, excellent question. I mean, again, that depends. I mean, again and again, what we keep seeing is the relationships between ideas. So, for example, there is one idea that you are born in a certain position. And this is very much true, like, saying you're born, you're a king. So you have a royal stature in society. This is very much true, for example, in India. You're born in a particular caste, you have a certain kind of social position, and that shapes who you are and what your entire sense is. And not because it, like, that's how people think about it. Like, they hold that your birth kind of shapes your character. So their kind of morality is almost tied to who you are. So if you're a king, then certain things are taken for granted. Now, that's a very different view of human beings, and all kinds of consequences follow from that, including the notion of honor connected to position. Whereas if you hold that a human being is a being of self-made soul, then you have a completely different notion of that. So I think that's the difference. Now let's take a question from Jeff. You had something. Let me do one thing. Let me take Brenda first, because she has not asked a question. So it's going to be yes. Brenda, Jeff, and then Francoise. Brenda, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to make the point that one of the characteristics of honor, which I think is extremely important, and I think it applies across the board, is to what extent does a person do what they deem to be correct and moral and right, or are they somehow still being self-serving? Are they putting themselves first and then deciding what to do second, so that they never compromise their own interests? To me, one cannot ever speak of being honorable if they're doing that. They always have to look more to the common good and the greater good than to themselves.
Absolutely, that's a great point. I mean, the point that, and this point is made by many people throughout history, and there is a disagreement on these. So, for example, like Machiavellians would disagree with that, but you know, Aristotle, there's a whole bunch of people who would agree. This certainly the view of the founding fathers that we're talking about, or so that there is a consistency between individual honor, kind of honor between friends and family, and honor with society as a one, as a that on the concept of honor kind of passes through all of these, and they are kind of consistent with each other. Absolutely. Jeff.
So Shrikant, thanks so much for hosting the subject, the discussion on this subject. I think it's rich because there are so many different conceptions of it. And so I'd like to just offer one, and that is that I think in this second category, which is kind of the relationship of people to each other, that there is always one person, and then there's another person, and then there's their relationship. It's like there are two partners in a marriage, and then there's the marriage. There are two people, you know, in a country, and then there's the country itself. There are two people in a business, and then there's the business. And in that, and then in some cases, there are, for example, two teams that are competing against each other, but they're agreeing to do it according to certain rules. Mm-hmm. And, you know, right on down to how we're going to do war, guided by the Geneva Convention. And so the sense of honor between folks is, to some extent, I think, an agreement on the ethics that we're going to observe in our relationship with each other, given whatever it is we're doing and the entity that we have decided together to join in creating and sustaining.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. Absolutely true. I think sense of social honor, whether it between individual people or with you and society as a whole, depends on commonly held moral notions. So common morality is the foundation. Like both people agree that this is good, that this is, you know, we regarded this as good, and we are committed to doing that. And that's the foundation, whether it is between two people or whether between, you know, in within a society. That's a great point. So it's going to be Francoise and then Mike.
Yes. Looking at the honor between people, you know, it's often based on success and failure. And the relationship to success and failure varies a lot with the cultures. But I'm wondering, you know, if within cultures and the relationship to success and failure, for instance, the Eastern world or Africa being so sensible about losing face versus a more Western approach of learning from mistake. So I'm wondering if there's not going to be a fusion, you know, of those concepts where people, mm-hmm. you know, when you talk about mostly admiration, the honor of those considerations are also based on communication, on explanation, you know, on tolerance. The tolerance and the acceptation of others, the pardon, in order to understand better between culture and communicating, you know, mm-hmm. all problems are based on communication. So if we can explain and discuss those things and get to a better understanding and that fusion, which may be possible.
Sure. Okay. Now, Francois, you're a good friend. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually talk about how kind of different ideas would look at everything that you've said. Okay. So firstly, the idea that this depends on success and failures, the concept of honor, half the people in the great conversation would completely disagree with that, because it is all, like many people would say, it's all about how righteously, how systematically, how conscientiously, how self-awarely, awarely you're trying to do the right thing. And that's what honor depends on. Doesn't depend on whether you succeed at a particular thing or not. So they would make a very sharp distinction between honor and success and failures. The second thing is that I think you make a fantastic point about kind of, the notions of honor in Africa, for example. Let's just take that example, Africa and the West. What happens is that the sense of honor is dependent on a whole range of ideas in each of the place. So there is a morality, there is epistemology. Now, your notion that everything is rooted in communication, that is a very much of an Enlightenment view. That, Enlightenment people would completely agree with that. A lot of the subjectivists would not agree with that. Lots of the materialists would not agree with that. Many people in Africa may not agree with that because it depends on the view that things are possible. It's possible to do things to rational communication. Like if you held that, okay, the tribal, your commitment to tribe is very important, or whether you're French or not is very important. And the different times of history, different cultures have held that. And in that case, communication is not the, holding that communication is a solution depends on reason. So it's like all of these ideas, and that's the beauty of this great conversation, that even when we say something, we are actually presupposing many of the ideas, many of the premises, which are different from people to people. So you get a notion, you get an understanding of all the possibilities. So the next one up is going to be Mike. Mike, go ahead.
Hey, a brief comment. Several people have mentioned that morality and ethics and honor is you're able to subordinate your personal goals to those of society. I think those that have been most successful have been able to equate society's goals to their own.
Very good.
I'm reminded of Abraham Lincoln praying that I don't want God to be on our side. I want to be on God's side.
Yep, very good. Thank you. So with that, let's move to the question on the last topic, and that is about fame and honor in society. Now, the interesting thing is that, so what is fame? Fame is, kind of positive evaluation of you by a large number of people within the society. So what is the connection between the concept of honor and concept of fame? Now, in a place like Greece, where the notion of morality is widely held by most people, there is a close connection between honor and fame. Still not a perfect one, but at least somewhat. When a society holds moralities which are very different from each other, or holds a morality which is subjective or materialist, there is going to be a very wide disparity between the people who are famous and people who are honorable. So the issue of kind of connection between honor and fame is going to vary dramatically based on how widespread is a certain morality held. That's pretty much how widespread it is held. I think in today's time, I don't think there is a morality which is widely held. There is tremendous variation of moralities that people hold. So therefore, fame is very, because somebody is famous means very little about whether they are likely to be honorable or not. So there is there's tremendous variation between them. So let me just open it up to any thoughts. So now you can bring up any topic on honor and society. There are many more topics than the issue of fame. itself, because the point that Mike brought up, for example, or Jeff brought up, that you really need something. I mean, ideally, you want something which is honorable for a person within kind of personal interaction with the people that they interact with, and also interaction with everybody else. Jeff, go ahead.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Shrikant, that this is rooted in morality, but I kind of differentiate morality from one's personal morality with ethics, and that ethics is kind of what we agree to, or what are in some way set as the rules of the game. So, for example, my personal morality with regard to my business or the business that I'm in might be one set of things, but the code of business ethics that we agree to abide by are they're not laws. They don't rise to that level, but they are things that we agree that we will do with each other. For example, we won't talk about each other behind each other's back. You have an issue, you go to that person. Mm-hmm. So no gossiping in that way, especially not malicious gossiping. That's an example of an ethic that we agree to in terms of how we'll act. And so when you go from what I personally think is right and what I'll do in my life to what I'll do in my marriage or my friendships or my business, that's ethics. And then it might rise, though there are certain ethics that we really want to codify as laws, that if you break these, there's going to be punishment. So I think that there's kind of levels.
Sure. Let me. That's excellent point. Absolutely agree with you. The concept there, I think, that I find very useful is mores, because that like kind of mores or kind of general practices. So not only that each field has its own practices, but different cultures have different mores. Like if you go to even within America, like there is a historian called David Hackett Fisher, and he talks about the differences of mores between New England versus Virginia versus Pennsylvania versus Kentucky. And these are very different mores. And these are morals, these are things taken for granted. And those exist, not only, so there is a personal kind of what you should do. Let's call it like morals, if you will. I'm going to use morals as a shorthand here. Okay. I'm using it in a wider context than people normally use it. So there is a morality for you of saying, okay, what will I do? Then within each of the groups that you're involved in, like there is a way in which your family members interact with each other. Some of these are objective that are common to everybody, but some of which are not, but which are still kind of part of what you do. Then there is each of the groups that you are involved in. Not only that, like you're part of a culture that does things a certain way. New Yorkers do something some way, which people in Topeka, Kansas do it another way. So and those are kind of taken for granted by New Yorkers. Whereas when, tourists come here, they think we are rude because we do this thing that everybody else knows that that's how we do things, So it's like, so there is misunderstandings that happen based on that, not only at kind of the city level, but at all kinds of levels. But absolutely. So let's see. So Joe, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that fame can be just notoriety, and notoriety can be with, you could be doing something terrible and be famous. So that, and that's mentioned in the text of one of the great ideas. It is a morally neutral concept, and it holds no real value, and it really it provides no stability, and so and it's detached from the idea of justice, so that it's just something that's not always it's not always a good, so therefore you can it's, and it's also one may act in order to be famous and compromise their character in the interim.
Yes.
And so if they do that, then they've lost their own personal self-respect, and which is actually quite the opposite of what honor really is.
Wonderful. Well, so this brings us to the end of this discussion of honor. This was an experiment to see whether this 103 great ideas, we can have great conversations, and I think it has worked out pretty well. So I'm quite pleased with it, and look forward to doing maybe other ideas soon. So thank you very much for coming. We're now going to go into the breakout rooms. So just give me a minute. I'm going to set up the breakout rooms.